More and more consumers are becoming concerned about the well-being of farm animals, but very few really know what makes farm animals happy. Jim and Birgit Martin are family friends. They were my employers in high school, and they're also leaders in the Ontario beef cattle industry. Jim has been the director of the Beef Farmers of Ontario and was a past director of the Beef Research Council for Canada. And presently, Birgit and Jim maintain involvement in their local cattlemen's association. Birgit is the director for Northeastern Ontario, on the board for the Ontario Soil and Crop Improvement Association, which is an applied research organization. Today, I'm lucky enough to be asking them some questions about beef cattle welfare. Birgit and Jim, thank you so much for joining me this morning.
You're welcome.
My pleasure.
So from personal experience working for you guys, I know that your work is extremely demanding, both physically and mentally, but I also know that it can be uniquely rewarding. If you were to describe why you farm cattle in a sentence or two, what would you say?
You first.
It's just, it's a passion I've had since I was very young. I enjoy working with animals, and I enjoy the lack of routine and the, kind of unknown of what's coming every day.
Yeah,
dealing with cattle.
I would firmly echo the sentiment about not having the same routine 2 days in a row. Every day is different. We're in charge of our own schedules, and working with cattle, working on the farm in the landscape is a pleasure.
Absolutely. Well, I know I enjoyed the same thing when I worked for you guys over a couple summers. So kind of diving into today's topic, right now, I think the loudest voices who are promoting animal welfare are people who are painting producers as money hungry, as insensitive to the welfare of their animals. How would you defend beef producers in light of such a popular narrative?
I would say that beef producers they really enjoy livestock, especially the cow-calf. I mean, with all the risks and how unsafe it can be at certain times of the year, for example, calving and so on, you have to really enjoy animals to do it. Just trying to think, I would say that any successful beef producer wouldn't be successful financially if they don't take great care of their animals. I mean, one of the key things to a successful beef operation is understanding cattle comfort, well-being, health, so that because you're getting paid on their gain. A happy animal is not going to gain well.
An unhappy animal.
An unhappy animal is not going to gain well. They have to be happy, content, or you're just not going to make money. And I will say this jokingly, but if they come around our farm in the fall of the year, the cattle that we show at certain exhibitions get much better care than I get. So, I mean, I wouldn't agree with that. That statement just does not work for a profitable cow-calf beef operation.
And just to put some numbers behind it, Jacob, beef farmers aren't rich. We strive to make a decent living. But when you compare it to like the average Canadian salary, it's below the average Canadian salary. And that still doesn't account for the fact that we have to purchase land, which is not included in any of the income tax information. It's not an eligible expense. So we're not rich. We strive to make a decent living. And as Jim said very clearly, we can't make that living unless the cattle are happy. They don't perform if they're not.
Absolutely. I feel like that ties back in really well to your first answer, that you're doing this because you're passionate about it. You're not doing it to get rich.
Right. We want to make a good living doing what we're doing, but our primary goal is not to get rich.
Absolutely. So if I were to really simplify research in the animal welfare field, generally what we're finding with farm animals is that when they have an opportunity to express what we call species specific behaviors. So natural behaviors, instinctual behaviors that are important to them. They have lower stress hormones, and we can maybe cautiously infer that they're happier, although happy is kind of a human term. But do you think there are any stages of beef production or styles of beef production where opportunities for cattle to express those instinctual behaviors might be lacking?
From our experience on our operation, our cattle always have the space required to do what they do as a herd, move as a herd. They groom each other. They run and play. The calves run and play. Cattle aren't necessarily the most ambitious animals, so it doesn't require a massive landscape to do that, or a massive footprint to give them the freedom that they need. There are probably there are obviously confinement situations where they don't have unlimited space, but there's still the space, from what we understand, given the codes of practice that are out there. The space is deemed sufficient in those circumstances. That's not our operation. Our operations are fairly open in terms of our cow-calf operation, our backgrounding operation, and our finishing operation. They're all fairly large open-based facilities. So speaking from our experience, our cattle can do what cattle do freely all the time. Jim, do you have any?
Not really. I have nothing to add to it, really, Jacob. I think that sums it up, pretty well. I mean, the only time maybe it's when you're having to transport cattle on wheels, somewhere else. But saying that, I mean, we have equipment where, the cows with calves, like the calves can be put in one section safely. The cows know their calves are in there. I mean, they willingly walk onto the trailer, but it is certainly an adjustment for the calf. We're having to put them on, and it's something new to them. But I mean, that would be one of the only real examples. And I mean, as you know, Jacob, we'd love to just chase them up and down the road as a herd from one farm to the other, but a lot of people have something else to say about that, so.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the stages of beef production that comes under criticism are feedlots and finishing. And let's say a feedlot producer wanted to appeal to the increased desire of consumers for better animal welfare. Let's say they wanted to provide more space. They wanted to provide soft lying surfaces or enrichment objects for grooming and scratching, things like that. What would be the biggest obstacle in the way of that producer?
For me, I think when I look at the feedlot industry now, what it's like, and then I look at these modern barns and how comfortable they are with rubber mats for floors and feed bunks that are set at this optimum size, and air ventilation in these barns, the number of scratching oiler type of things that are set in these pens, location of water, all of these things. I think they're doing a very good job, today's modern barn. And I mean, there's research out there, certainly mainly from US universities, that will show, the types of barns and how well cattle are doing in them these days, as far as rate of gain and feed efficiency compared to older style of barns. So clearly it's working. I mean, the content cattle are gaining well and getting maximum gain with the least amount of feed. The thing that I would change is the amount of transportation that goes on with these cattle. You take a calf coming out of northern Alberta, he could have a new address, in Quebec or southwestern Ontario. That's a long drive for such a young animal and a high stress on it. I know why it happens, but I mean, that's the one thing I'd love to see changed, where, those Saskatchewan, northern Alberta calves get fed grain that's grown in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and housed in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and processed there, instead of you know, because there's a lot of miles put on these young calves at a very sensitive age and high stress.
That unfortunately is a pretty large scale industry change, but it makes sense to feed cattle where the feed is, and to transport the final product in a refrigerated truck rather than truck the live animal to where the market is. Like right now in Southern Ontario, there's a fair-sized feedlot industry because we have the market here. Obviously, Eastern Canada is the biggest market for Canadian beef and into the US. But Jim's right. Like if from an animal welfare perspective, it would be far better for an animal to stay close to home, be fed there, and then that the final product, the beef be moved, not the animal be moved.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if this improvement, this big industry change were to be made or were to be moved towards, would that require different behaviors from consumers? Would consumers need to be willing to pay more for their beef for a more vertically integrated industry like that?
No, I don't think so. The biggest challenge for consumers here in Ontario would be, unfortunately, less locally job supported beef, for example, because there just isn't enough calves raised in Ontario and Quebec to feed the Ontario-Quebec population. A lot of consumers are really wanting to buy local, good for them, know where their beef comes from, but unless there was a lot more calves raised in Ontario, that would be the biggest change that I see, is that you wouldn't see so many consumers getting, you know, true local, you know, wouldn't have as a local feel, you know, as job support, job creation. That's the downside to it. I see. I don't see them having to pay more, Jacob. Quite frankly, I'll bet you the cost may be a little less.
Yeah.
You know, you know, you can, in a refrigerated truck, you can pile beef to the ceiling.
Yeah.
A live cattle, we can't do that. There's a lot of empty space in that truck.
Mm-hmm.
That's my feeling.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, for Ontario specifically, because we have a large population here and a small cattle industry, and we bring a lot of cattle into feed to supply the market, it would mean a change in the, we'd basically be importing more of our beef, importing from other provinces, still within country, but importing nonetheless.
Yeah, because importing within Canada is in other places like cross-national distances. So,
I would say the biggest change, Jacob, I'd say, not in price increase, but also the other nice thing about Ontario grown, raised, processed product is Ontario has a very high health standard, food safety standards, and that consumers would be missing out on that. Not to say that US is inferior, but Ontario certainly is a industry leader.
Right. And we'd be giving that up if we imported a lot more of our beef.
Yep.
So in other countries, Switzerland being one example, the legislation on animal welfare is much stricter. It means that producers are obviously bound to provide better welfare, no matter who they are. But it also means that the ones who are intentionally doing a better job don't have the potential to profit less like they could here because of the increased expense included with improved welfare. What are your views on strict legislation like that versus what we see in Canada, where there's incentive programs, but not much as far as law goes?
My personal opinion is that legislating this type of action, I'm not quite sure what would need to be legislated, because from our perspective, there are certainly things that could change, practices maybe that can be enhanced. But our fear is that if it's legislated top down, that the cost is entirely borne by the producer. When it is an industry initiated change from the grassroots up, with a recognition from the industry that it's a positive change, that it's beneficial, then the cost can be perhaps spread across the supply chain, rather than just being told that a farmer needs to change and he needs to figure out how to pay for it.
And I'm, Jacob, a firm believer that the financially successful beef operations in Ontario are already adhering to these best recommendation code of practices for animal welfare. Because again, it does not pay to not do it well. And you use the example of Switzerland, and I'm not real familiar with their system, but a couple of years ago, there was a delegation from Scotland come over at the time of the Royal Winter Fair to see how some of the Canadian feedlot industry, specifically here in Ontario, how well it was being done. And they were just blown away at how well, some of these top feedlots are doing things, and how, like our chute systems on the amount of padding that's in there. There's no animal on metal contact, for example. It's how safe it was, how animal friendly it was. Like it's and right now we're doing this voluntarily because it pays, not because we're legislated. I think that I'm more of a fan of if they worked on the education to educate all new or startup producers on the benefits of doing it the right way, as compared to legislating us.
Mm-hmm. That's a good idea.
Absolutely.
The ones that are doing it they're doing it for a reason. It's not because they were legislated, because it paid.
Absolutely. Do you think increased pride in your work comes with doing things better besides the increased profit?
Absolutely.
Well, yeah. I mean, sure. I mean, it's one thing to get the job done, but it's just, to get the job done a little better. Yeah. You just feel better about it. I mean,
yeah, there's pride in a job well done.
Absolutely. You mentioned education for new producers, but something that I think about all the time is that most people are completely disconnected from their food due to the level of urbanization we have, at least here in Ontario. Do you think this calls for changes in wider education? Would you like to see a society that generally knows more about animal welfare, about animal behavior, and about farming?
Oh, absolutely. We train people how to use a computer, how to drive a car, how to everything, but we just, as long as they know how to go and shop, that seems to be all they need to know about food production. And whether we're talking about our local cattlemen's organization or a family farm, anytime we can be including the consumer to become more aware of how food is produced, it's just a benefit for everybody. Because I mean, I know on farm we make it a joke, but I mean, there's actually kids out there that think chocolate milk comes from brown cows.
Yeah, and I think getting back to kids thinking that kind of thing, it needs to start, in my opinion, in the school system. And there are agricultural organizations that work towards that goal of having more agricultural examples or outright agricultural based curriculum. But there's not a lot of uptake universally across the province or across the country of that yet. It would be nice to see more, where even if it's during a math class that agricultural examples are used to illustrate the math point. There are organizations that can supply that, but it's not getting out to as many people as it needs to. So hopefully that can improve over time.
Absolutely, I completely agree. I think we'll leave it there. Jim and Birgit, thank you so much for your time again. I think it's a rare opportunity for the public to be able to connect with some of the people behind their food, and I'm really glad we could make that happen today.
Yep, no problem, Jacob.
We're happy to do it.
Birgit and Jim Martin are the owner-operators of Pure Island Beef. You can learn more about their operation at their website, www.pureislandbeef.com. If you're interested in learning more about the personality and needs of beef cattle, how they're farmed in North America, and how improvements can be made, I'll be delving deeper into all of those points in my Mother Earth News article linked below.